The sun glared off the glass towers of Quantara Tech like a row of knives. Outside the security gate, an older black woman stood in a tailored jacket, hair silver at the temples, holding nothing but a slim ID card. She was calm, patient, almost invisible in the morning rush. A guard in a neon vest stepped in front of her. "Deliveries out back," he barked. "Employees only through here." "I'm here for the board meeting," she said softly. He laughed. "Right. And I'm the CEO." She tried to hand him her badge. He slapped it out of her hand. Phones in line started filming. Someone whispered, "Is he serious?" "Move along, ma'am," the guard snapped, blocking her again. "Trespassers get cuffed." She looked at him once, a cool, assessing look, then bent to pick up the badge. The guard's hand shot out, shoving her shoulder. In the scuffle, his open palm cracked against her cheek with an audible pop. Gasps. A ripple through the crowd. "God, did he just hit her?" a young intern murmured, phone camera shaking. The woman straightened slowly, fingers brushing her cheek. She didn't yell. She didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her jacket, lifted her badge again, and said, "I'm late." Behind the security line, a sleek black car rolled up. A younger woman in a headset jumped out, holding a clipboard. "Ma'am," she called, "we're ready for you." The guard blinked. "Wait, you know her?" The aide stepped between them. "She's expected upstairs." Phones captured the moment as the aide ushered the woman past the guard, through the metal gates, toward the gleaming lobby. People whispered now, trying to guess who she was. A delivery guy muttered, "She looks like somebody important." Another said, "I think she's a consultant or something." As the glass doors hissed open, the woman glanced back once at the guard, expression unreadable. Then she disappeared into the building, badge flashing green under the scanner. The last thing the guard heard was her aide saying, "The board is waiting." The elevator doors close behind her, gold numbers climbing higher, straight to the top floor, leaving the guard staring at his own reflection in the glass, suddenly unsure who he just struck. The elevator hums as it rises. She watches her reflection in the mirrored doors, a woman everyone thinks is a retired accountant or maybe a visiting lecturer. They don't know she built the very code that launched Quantara Tech. They don't know she's been buying up patents, quietly funding teams, and moving her equity behind shell companies for over a decade. While Quantara Tech grew famous, she stayed invisible. She drove an old sedan, wore off-the-rack clothes, let people assume she was a minor shareholder or a consultant. But behind that invisibility was leverage, a controlling stake hidden in plain sight. Back in the elevator, her phone buzzes, a coded alert from her attorney, "Board vote on the sale happening now. You must be in the room." She tilts her head slightly, the only outward sign of emotion, and tucks the phone back into her jacket as the elevator reaches the top floor. The doors open onto the executive floor, polished concrete, glass walls, quiet footfalls. A junior receptionist with a tablet steps forward nervously. "Name?" she asks. The woman hands over her badge. The receptionist blinks, scrolling. "I'm sorry, you're not on today's list." She tilts her head. "Check again." The receptionist turns the tablet discreetly so only she can see. The list has been altered, not just missing her name, but showing interim CEO next to a rival executive she's known for years. She takes in the details in a single glance, the fonts, the timestamp, the unmistakable fingerprints of sabotage. Someone's tried to erase her minutes before the vote. She doesn't argue. She simply takes back her badge, slips it into her pocket, and walks past the desk. Her aide falls into step beside her, whispering, "They're trying to lock you out." "I know," she murmurs. "Keep recording." The camera pans as she walks down the corridor, past framed patents and press clippings, her heels clicking like a metronome. Conference room doors line both sides. At the end, frosted glass etched with the company logo. Beyond it, the boardroom. She pauses just long enough to smooth her jacket. The receptionist calls after her, "Ma'am, you can't go in there," but she pushes the doors open anyway. Inside, a dozen board members around a sleek table, rival executive at the head. She enters without a word, head high, ignoring the stares. Her badge pings green on the access scanner, and the frosted doors swing shut behind her. She takes a seat at the far end, silent and poised. The rival executive's smile flickers. Phones buzz as word of her arrival spreads. The board meeting she wasn't supposed to attend has just become the showdown of the decade. They thought she was just another consultant. But for years, while the world watched Quantara Tech climb to the top of the market, she was quietly building a different kind of power. She funded entire engineering teams out of her own pocket, patented code under companies no one could trace back to her, and kept every receipt. She wasn't hiding because she was weak. She was hiding because she'd been burned before, a brilliant invention stolen, credit erased, money gone. That betrayal taught her to operate in silence, to play the long game, to own the foundation instead of the facade. By the time she walked into that boardroom, she didn't just have shares. She had the loyalty of the people who built the company's future, the patents that powered its technology, and the documents that proved it all belonged to her. Everyone in that room thought they were about to vote her out. In reality, she'd already built a chessboard where they were the pawns. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and quiet arrogance. She took the chair at the far end without asking permission, placed a slim folder in front of her, and folded her hands. Not a single board member welcomed her. Her rival, now labeled interim CEO, smirked and began to speak. He talked about a strategic partnership with a foreign conglomerate, about unlocking shareholder value, about modernizing Quantara Tech. But behind the phrases lay the truth. They were selling the company's soul, the technology she had shepherded for years. She said nothing. She listened. She let the silence grow heavy. The board members shifted, unsure why her presence felt like gravity itself. On the table in front of her lay the folder, quiet, closed, waiting. Inside were the patents, the share certificates, and the legal standing to flip the entire vote in seconds. Across the polished table, the rival executive's phone buzzed with alerts. The viral video of the slap at the gate had just broken online. Public sympathy was shifting. Journalists were connecting dots. Who was this older woman walking into the boardroom moments after being assaulted at the company gate? Still, she stayed silent, giving them all the rope they needed. Her eyes moved from one director to the next, memorizing faces, reading reactions. The rival executive smiled thinly and leaned back in his chair. "Any questions?" he asked. She reached out and slid the folder forward an inch, her nails clicking softly on the table. And then she spoke for the first time. "Yes," she said. "I have a few." The room went still. Phones stopped buzzing. In the pause, a sense spread through the directors that they had underestimated the woman at the far end of the table. And for the first time, the rival executive looked afraid. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam the table. She simply opened the folder. Inside were documents no one in that room had ever seen. Certificates of ownership. Patent filings with her name spelled out, not hidden in shell companies anymore. Voting proxies quietly accumulated from employees she had personally mentored. And a single legal memo, stamped and sealed, granting her the right to call for an emergency vote. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The rival executive shifted in his seat, suddenly pale. "This is a stunt," he said, but his voice cracked. She leaned back. "It's not a stunt. It's the foundation of everything you're sitting on. I built it, I funded it, and I still own it." Directors stared at the pages like they were radioactive. Someone whispered, "This can't be right." Another said, "Check the filings." A junior lawyer tapped at his laptop, eyes widening as the state registry confirmed every entry. The rival tried to recover. "These shares are void. We have a contract." She cut him off with a flick of her hand. "The contract you're talking about?" She gestured to her aide, who slid a second document across the table. "It's already been declared unenforceable by the court." This morning, outside the boardroom, phones were blowing up with the viral clip of the guard slapping her. Inside the boardroom, the timing landed like thunder. News anchors were connecting the dots. Hashtags began trending. Public sentiment turned in seconds from indifference to outrage. She stood. "Here's what's going to happen," she said quietly but clearly. "We're going to hold a vote. Right now. Before any sale, any transfer, any so-called modernization deal can go through. You can vote your conscience or you can vote your contracts. Either way, this ends today. The rival executive tried to shout her down. This is illegal, she tilted her head. So was your plan to erase me from the guest list and sell my company out from under me? The directors looked at one another. Some lowered their eyes. Others pulled out phones to check their own shares. The balance of power was shifting by the second. And then she did something no one expected. She didn't demand. She didn't threaten. She simply held their gaze silent. Because she knew silence is a weapon too. Finally, a director at the far end said, "Let's vote." The rival executive's face went slack. The room had turned. As hands went up one by one, she felt years of careful planning converge into a single moment. All those nights of contracts, code, and quiet alliances were no longer invisible. They were here, embodied in her standing at the head of the table while the so-called interim CEO watched his power evaporate. But this coup hadn't been built in a day. Months earlier, while the rival executive plotted the sale, she had been building something else, an invisible network inside the company. Engineers, middle managers, silent investors, all people she'd helped at one point in their careers. People who believed in her ethics and her vision. She had never called it a movement. She had simply done the work, lending small sums when projects stalled, mentoring overlooked talent, connecting brilliant misfits to legal advice, funding patents under their names, but retaining shared ownership. When the board tried to erase her, these people had already pledged their shares to her trust. She didn't need spies or hackers. She had loyalty. And loyalty is the one currency no hostile takeover can buy. While the rival was busy pushing glossy press releases, she was quietly seeding her plan. While they booked hotel ballrooms for investor calls, she built a legal fortress. And while they underestimated her, she studied their contracts line by line. Now, in the boardroom, her attorney arrived, calm as an anchor in a storm, carrying sealed court orders confirming the transfer of shares and the nullification of the rival's contract. He placed the papers on the table with a quiet authority that silenced even the loudest directors. "We've verified everything," he said. "All filings are current. All signatures are authenticated. Any attempt to move company assets without her consent will be frozen immediately." The rival executive's face drained of color. His phone buzzed relentlessly with alerts from regulators, banks, and public relations teams. Outside the glass walls, employees were gathering, watching the live stream, realizing the balance of power inside their company had just flipped. She looked across at the rival and, for the first time, allowed a thin smile. "This isn't about revenge," she said quietly. "It's about stewardship. This company is bigger than either of us." The attorney leaned in and whispered something to her, a confirmation that their motion to block the sale had already been filed. She nodded once. Her voice over the speakerphone, effective immediately, the sale of Quantara Tech's core assets is halted. A full shareholder audit begins today. Any unauthorized transfers will be reversed and reported to regulators. Gasps. Chairs scraping. Directors reaching for phones to issue new orders. The old guard of the board suddenly on her side because she wasn't just powerful, she was protecting their investment. And yet, even in that moment of triumph, she felt the hairs rise on the back of her neck. Because she knew desperate people don't go quietly. She knew her rival had one more move left. Her attorney caught her eye and murmured, "We've contained them, but watch your back." She straightened her jacket, collected her folder, and looked directly into the camera broadcasting to the employees downstairs. "This company was built on innovation," she said. "Today we innovate our ethics too." The employees watching from their desks burst into cheers. In the boardroom, silence reigned, the kind of silence that comes when the inevitable has arrived. But she knew this was just Act 2. Power shifts create vacuums, and vacuums invite sabotage. The boardroom had turned into a slow-motion landslide. One by one, directors who'd once avoided eye contact with her were now sliding their folders toward her attorney, murmuring support. Phones buzzed under the table as regulators sent urgent messages. Even the rival executive had gone silent, his rehearsed pitch dying in his throat. She stood at the head of the table, a slender figure in a tailored jacket, hands lightly clasped in front of her. She did not need to shout. The power was no longer something she had to demand. It was simply there, filling the room like electricity waiting for a switch to flip. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said quietly, "thank you for your patience." The attorney beside her adjusted his glasses and spoke into a small microphone. "As of this moment, the special shareholder vote has concluded. By a majority of 51%, Ms. Name is appointed Interim Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. All attempts to sell the company's core assets are hereby frozen under state and federal injunction." Gasps. Chairs shifted. Someone actually dropped a pen. The rival executive opened his mouth as if to protest, but no sound came out. She continued, still calm, "I accept the appointment. But let me be clear, this is not a coup. This is a course correction. Quantara Tech was built on innovation and integrity. We are not for sale to the highest bidder." Her words were already being live-streamed to employees across the globe. In offices from San Francisco to Singapore, workers stared at their screens in disbelief as the woman who had been slapped at the front gate only an hour earlier now stood as their CEO. The rival executive's phone buzzed again. Fraud alerts. Contract cancellations. Banks freezing transfers. Public opinion flipping in real time. His smirk had turned into a grimace. She reached out and gently rotated the CEO's nameplate toward herself. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll take it from here." The room held its breath. In that moment, she was no longer invisible. She was the architect of the company's future. And yet, even as she took the seat, a message flashed across her own phone, anonymous, untraceable. "This isn't over. Watch the servers." Her eyes narrowed. She had expected one last play. Sabotage doesn't surrender easily. She tapped her aide on the shoulder and whispered a single instruction: lock down the data center. Downstairs, engineers were already moving, blocking access, changing root passwords, severing remote logins. Security teams fanned out to server rooms. She'd planned for this contingency months ago. Turning back to the board, she said aloud, "We'll be pausing all external connections until our internal audit is complete." Some directors nodded, others looked uneasy. But no one dared oppose her now. She straightened the papers before her. "You all know me as a consultant," she said. "What you didn't know is that I've been here from the beginning. This company was born in my apartment with 3 engineers and a single line of code. We dreamed of building technology that served people, not exploited them. That's still my dream." She looked down the table, making eye contact with each director in turn. "If you want to be part of that, stay. If you don't, resign today. No more shadows." Outside the boardroom, applause broke out among employees watching the live stream. In the hallways, whispers turned into cheers. Upstairs, the rival executive slumped back, realizing his power base had crumbled. She sat at the head of the table, not just physically but symbolically, and exhaled for the first time all morning. It was done. She had taken the CEO's seat. But she also knew it was only the start of the real fight. Becoming CEO was only the beginning. Within minutes of the vote, her phone buzzed with warnings, attempts to wipe servers, mass resignations from shell companies, even a spike in outbound data traffic flagged as possible leaks. Her rival executive might have lost the boardroom battle, but he still had allies inside the network. She called an emergency meeting of the top engineers and legal team right there in the boardroom. "We're not here to celebrate," she said. "We're here to secure what we built." Her attorney slid a list across the table, names of contractors, offshore accounts, server credentials. She assigned tasks without hesitation. Freeze these accounts, revoke these logins, mirror these servers, call this regulator. Years of teaching had made her a master of calm delegation. The live stream continued. Employees watched in real time as their new CEO dismantled the sabotage infrastructure piece by piece. This wasn't a victory lap. It was triage. Meanwhile, she instructed her aide to locate the security guard who had slapped her at the gate. Not to punish, but to understand. The aide returned with a report. The guard had been misled by a memo labeling her as an imposter, issued by the rival's office. Another pawn in the larger scheme. She nodded. Bring him up, she said. Minutes later, the guard stood nervously at the back of the boardroom, eyes downcast. He started to stammer an apology. She raised a hand. I don't need your apology, she said gently. I need you to see the truth. She gestured to the live stream screens showing the company's attempted sale and sabotage. This is what you were protecting. This is what you were used for. Tears welled in the guard's eyes. He had a family, a mortgage, a job he thought was honest. She offered him training, not termination, and assigned him to the new internal security unit reporting directly to her. In that moment, the employees watching saw not just a CEO, but a leader who understood justice without humiliation. Back at the table, she laid out her vision. This company will no longer operate in shadows, she said. We will publish our contracts, our code of ethics, and our profit-sharing plan. We will be transparent about our partnerships. And we will make innovation serve the public good. Directors shifted, some uncomfortable, but most nodding slowly. Engineers messaged their support in internal chats. The media, once skeptical, now called it the most dramatic corporate takeover in tech history. Her rival executive made one last desperate attempt. He leaned forward and hissed, "You think this ends here? You've made enemies you can't imagine." She met his gaze without blinking. You made them first, she said quietly. She reached for a sealed envelope, the one her attorney had carried in all morning, and opened it on the table. Inside was the independent audit showing every unauthorized transaction, every shell company, every offshore transfer linked back to the rival and his partners. She slid it across to him like a final chess move. This is going to the regulators tonight, she said. He tried to stand, but two internal security officers stepped behind him. His phone buzzed again, this time with fraud alerts freezing his personal accounts. Outside the boardroom, law enforcement vehicles pulled up. Cameras caught everything. She turned back to the board. This is your moment to decide who you are, she said. Complicity ends here. If you want to be part of the rebuild, you'll have my support. If you want to keep playing games, you'll face consequences. The live stream audience exploded in supportive comments. Hashtags trended. Employees posted selfies with captions like "New Era" and "She built it." She paused then, looking at the guard, at the engineers, at the board members. This isn't revenge, she said. It's stewardship. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself a small smile. Not of triumph, but of relief. The years of quiet planning, the humiliation at the gate, the showdown in the boardroom, it had all converged into this moment of reckoning. But she also knew they weren't out of the woods. Power shifts invite chaos. Her phone buzzed with a new alert. Regulators were on their way upstairs. She had to prepare for the final act. Let them come, she murmured. We're ready. The camera lingered on her seated at the head of the table, calm and steady, as the company prepared to reinvent itself under her leadership. She had walked through the fire and was still standing. The guard who had slapped her now stood behind her as part of her new security team, a living symbol of how completely she'd turned the story around. This wasn't just taking the CEO's seat. This was rewriting the company's DNA in real time. The echo of footsteps in the hallway sounded different now. Not the brisk march of assistants or the nervous shuffle of board members, but the deliberate tread of people who knew they were about to change everything. Two sets of glass doors swung open. Regulators and federal investigators entered the boardroom without ceremony, badges flashing under the LED lights. Behind them, a small camera crew from the state attorney general's office rolled silently. This was no longer a private dispute. This was the law moving in. She stayed seated at the head of the table, hands folded, the CEO's nameplate now firmly in front of her. The rival executive sat 3 chairs down, pale and rigid, his phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip. The security guard who had once slapped her now stood at her back, shoulders squared, eyes forward, a living symbol of how completely the narrative had inverted. The lead investigator cleared her throat. MS, name. We're here to execute a warrant for digital and financial records connected to Quantara Tech and its former acting officers. Everything you need is here, she said, sliding a hard drive across the table. Mirrored and time-stamped. You'll also find a full list of off-book accounts, shell companies, and external contracts tied to the attempted sale. The agent raised her eyebrows, impressed at the preparation. She gestured to her team, who began collecting phones, laptops, and paper files from the rival and his allies. In the corner, a director whispered, "We're really doing this." The rival executive tried a last-ditch plea. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, voice cracking. "We were trying to maximize shareholder value." The investigator cut him off. "You'll have your chance to explain at the arraignment." As the agents moved, she addressed the board calmly. "You've seen the evidence. You've seen the tactics. You have a choice right now. Stand with transparency or stand with sabotage. There's no middle ground anymore." One by one, board members nodded or looked down at the table. A few quietly slid their resignations to her attorney. Others, relieved to see the conspiracy collapsing, pledged support for the transition. She rose, letting her voice carry not just to the room, but to the live stream still running for employees worldwide. This company belongs to the people who build it, not the people who manipulate it. We will rebuild from this moment forward with clear contracts, open books, and a share of the upside for everyone who creates value here. We will also create a restitution fund for employees harmed by past practices. The rival executive laughed bitterly. "You think you're a savior. You're just another power grabber." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "If I wanted power, I could have taken it years ago. I wanted stewardship. You left me no choice." Federal agents lifted him from his chair. His phone buzzed one last time, an alert of frozen accounts, offshore transfers reversed. Cameras caught the image of him being led out while she remained seated at the head of the table, calm and upright. Outside, the media frenzy reached a fever pitch. Headlines flashed across tickers. CEO coup goes viral. Hidden founder emerges. Rival executive arrested. Employees posted selfies wearing "Built by her name" stickers. The story had gone global. She turned to the security guard. "Thank you for staying," she said quietly. He swallowed hard. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. We'll need people like you," she said. "People who know the ground level, not just the boardroom." He nodded, eyes wet. Then she addressed the employees watching the live stream. "I can't promise a perfect future, but I can promise this. Never again will you be blindsided by decisions made behind closed doors. Never again will your work be sold without your consent." The chat feed exploded with emojis and words of support. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe. That evening, after the regulators had finished their sweep and the boardroom had emptied, she stayed behind alone. The skyline outside the windows pulsed with neon, and her reflection hovered in the glass, a superimposition of past and future. She thought of the years spent invisible, of the humiliation at the gate, of the rival executive's smirk when he believed he'd erased her from the guest list. She crossed to the CEO's desk, not the table where the vote had been held, but the private office now legally hers, and opened a drawer. Inside lay a single sheet of paper she'd carried for years, a handwritten list of the values she'd promised herself never to abandon. Innovation serves people. Power protects, not praise. Integrity over image. Teach, even when betrayed. She pinned the paper to a corkboard above the desk, right next to a framed photograph of the company's original 3 engineers. For a moment, she could smell the coffee and cheap takeout from those early days, feel the scuffed linoleum of her apartment floor under her feet. Her phone buzzed, a message from her mentor. "You did it. You saved it." She smiled, typed back a simple reply, "We saved it." She closed her eyes briefly, letting the quiet settle over her. The regulators were still in the building, but their energy now was protective, not adversarial. Her board was fractured, but salvageable. Her employees were galvanized. The company servers were secured, contracts nullified, new bylaws ready to be filed in the morning. Tomorrow, she would begin the harder work, drafting a new charter, negotiating with governments, rebuilding trust with customers. But tonight, she had done what she set out to do. She had turned a public humiliation into a corporate rebirth. She took a deep breath and walked to the window. Far below, she could see the gate where it had all started, where a guard had slapped her, believing she didn't belong. Now the gate stood empty, the security booth dark, the badge scanner glowing faintly green. In her mind, she replayed that moment, the slap, the phone's recording, the walk past the guard without a word. She had known then that silence was her greatest weapon. Now she knew something else. Visibility could be just as powerful when wielded at the right moment. She turned back to the office and reached for a small brass nameplate, sliding it into place on the desk. It read, her name, Chief Executive Officer. She traced the letters with her fingertip, then sat down, leaning back in the chair. Outside, reporters were still camped on the steps. Inside, the building hummed with the low thrum of servers and after-hours cleaning crews. But here, at the top, she sat alone, her hands resting on the armrests, eyes fixed straight ahead. In her mind, she heard the echo of her younger self coding late at night, dreaming of building something that would last. She heard the voices of the engineers she'd mentored, the employees she'd quietly supported, the guards she'd just given a second chance. And beneath it all, she heard the steady beat of her own promise, power used for stewardship, not conquest. The camera would fade here, a wide shot of her seated at the desk, skyline behind her, the nameplate gleaming under soft light. A woman who entered the building in humiliation, now steering its future with calm authority. The last frame would linger on her eyes as she looked straight into the lens, a silent message to anyone watching: you underestimated the wrong person. And with that, the story would close not with revenge, but with transformation. Not with a takeover, but with a reclamation. Not with a downfall, but with a beginning.